Ashley. I run a sewing blog called Sincerely Sews. Today I'm going to show you how to make this super easy skirt. It's got side seam pockets, a slit up one leg, and an easy to sew elastic waistband. If you can sew a straight line, you can make this skirt. So come on, let's get started. I'll be using woven cotton fabric to make this skirt. The first step is to take your waist measurement. When you're measuring yourself, make sure that you're pulling your tape measure taut, but not too tight. You want it to be able to slide around just a little bit so you have room to breathe. I took half my waist measurement and added that to the circumference of my skirt, and then made sure that I would still have enough room to get the skirt around my hips with some ease. Next, you'll want to find out how long to make your skirt. I like to do this by standing in front of a mirror and looking at my tape measure. I measured out my 2-inch wide elastic to a little bit smaller than my waist, and then made sure that the elastic would be comfortable around my waist once my skirt was finished. Now comes the part where we'll have to do a little bit of math. We'll be cutting out 3 rectangles to make this skirt. 1 large rectangle for the back, and 2 slightly smaller rectangles for the front. I wrote down my desired skirt length and then added a couple of inches to allow for hem and seam allowances. Then for the back width of the skirt, I took half of my waist measurement and added a 5/8 inch seam allowance on either side. Do the same for the front of the skirt, but don't forget to add a cut for the slit. To add the slit, cut all the way from the top to the bottom of your front skirt piece, but be sure to add an extra 5/8 inch seam allowance on either side of the slit. After you've figured out how big each piece should be, double check your measurements before you start cutting into your cloth. I used a rotary cutter and my cutting mat to cut out each of these rectangles. This is what the pattern for the pocket looks like. The long side will get cut on the fold, and the short side is where we'll put our hand in. Make sure you can fit your whole hand in before you cut each piece out on the fold. We'll need 2 of these all together to make our 2 pockets. After your pockets are cut out, you'll have 2 pieces that look like this when you open them up. The next thing you should do is finish the bottom edge of your pocket bag. I forgot to do this and I had to go back and fix it later. You can either use your serger or some pinking shears to just go ahead and finish off that bottom curved edge. Here you can see the 2 front pieces of my skirt with the right sides facing up. This is where the slit will be. Now we're going to take our pocket bags and pin them to the upper corners of the side seams of the skirt. Make sure that you have right sides facing together. Then grab the next pocket bag and pin it to the other upper corner of the front part of the skirt. Then take the other side of each pocket bag and pin those sides to the upper corners of the back side of your skirt, making sure to keep all right sides facing together. When we stitch the pocket bags down to the side seam of the skirt, use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I sewed my elastic waistband together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I grabbed some fray check and used that to finish off the raw edges, then top stitched either side of the seam. Next, I serged all of the raw edges of the hemline of my skirt. Then I used my serger to attach the pocket bags to the sides of the skirts. If you're going to use your serger to attach the pocket bags, make sure that you remember to take out any of your pins. You definitely don't want to run a pin through your serger on accident. When you're done attaching the pocket bags, you should have something that looks kind of like this. Different rectangles of the skirt with the pocket bags in between. Next, make sure that the seam allowances of the pocket bags are going towards the pocket bags themselves. Then we're going to top stitch along the edge of that seam allowance to give the pocket bag a nice finished opening. Next, fold the pocket bags in half so that the sides of your fabric pieces are lining up, with the pocket bag sticking out like this. Then pin the side seam of the skirt together. You'll want to mark about 1 inch to 1.5 inches below the top edge of your skirt and above where the pocket bag ends to create the opening for your hand to fit through. Here I'm just using a piece of tailor's chalk as a guide. When we stitch this together, we'll be stitching down about 1 inch to 1.5 inches from the top and then skipping over the middle to make an opening for your hand to fit through before continuing on to sew the rest of the side seam. When you do this, make sure that you backstitch at the top and bottom of that pocket bag opening so that it doesn't come undone later on. Here you can see me sewing down that first inch or inch and a half, then leaving a gap open for the opening of the pocket bag, and then continuing on the rest of my side seam. Here I'm using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. After that's done, you can open things up to reveal the nice pocket bag opening that you've created. The last step will be to stitch across the bottom of the pocket bag so that nothing falls out. I also like to tack the top of the pocket bag in place at the waistline. Now you can really see that your skirt is starting to take shape. Next, we'll sew the front slit of our skirt. When I measured mine, I measured it down to be about 13 inches, but later on I decided to go back and make the slit a little bit higher. I placed 2 straight pins right next to each other where my slit will begin, so I know not to sew past that. Make sure to backstitch right before you get to those 2 pins so that your slit stays in place. Next, set the stitch length on your machine to do a running stitch. Sew the rest of the slit seam using this long running stitch. Then don't forget to set your machine back to a regular stitch length when you're done. Press the slit seam open all the way down the length of the slit. Then remove the running stitch. You'll have a crisp pressed edge for your slit that we can top stitch down later. I top stitched my slit at about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I gave my entire skirt a 1-inch hem. Now you can serge across the top edge of your skirt. At this point, your skirt should look like a giant rectangular tube with a slit on the front side. At the top of your skirt, mark each quarter of the circumference. Repeat these quarter markings around the circumference of your elastic waistband. After you've pinned each quarter of the skirt to the corresponding quarter of the waistband, you'll have something that looks like this. You should be able to stretch the elastic enough that the skirt fabric is now pulled taut. The last step in creating the skirt is to zigzag the waistband to the rest of the skirt body. You want to use a zigzag for this part so that the elastic is able to stretch without breaking the thread. Backstitch a little bit to get started. Then stretch the elastic and keep it stretched while you sew the zigzag stitches. This can seem a little bit tricky at first if you're not used to holding this kind of tension. Just take it slow and do a small section at a time. If you're having trouble, make sure that you sink your needle down into the fabric before you let go of anything. After you zigzag all the way around the circumference of the waistband, make sure you backstitch at the end. When the elastic is no longer stretched, you'll see that it creates a really beautiful, easy gather in the skirt. Now your skirt's all done and ready to wear! Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something from this project. If you make one of these skirts, tag me on social media at Sincerely Sews. I would love to see what you come up with. I've got more sewing tutorials on the way, so make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel so you can see what's next. Check out my blog at sincerelysews.com where I post more tutorials and written instructions for all of my videos. Thanks for watching and happy sewing! You just need some basic math quills?